Because I think. Thank you.
There
Okay.
you go.
All right, let's get started. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we'll call the roll call. Let's see. Carl Balduff, Eric Beckerman,
Here.
Elizabeth Childs here, Paul Connors, Amy Frigiletti, Joe Reardon. That's you, Joe.
I think Joe's frozen.
Joe froze. Okay. All right. And just so we know who else is on the call for the meeting, I can see John Cronin, Peter Collins, Phil. But I have an RF that I don't know who you are. You don't have an audio. Your audio is muted. You want to let us know who you are? Okay. All right. And MJ, do you want to let us know who you are? Okay. And the 781-234-3300, will you let us know who you are? *6 would, you're unmuted. Can you just tell us who you are? Okay. All right, fine. I'll just ask those of you who are just not identified to just stay muted then throughout the meeting, please. Thank you. Okay. I'm trying to figure out this phone number. Okay. Thanks, Mike. That's fine. Just so I know who you are. That's great. And the phone number, the 781-234-3300, you're not muted, but if you press *6, you can mute yourself. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Let me let Michelle in. Okay. All right, thank you. So the first order of business is approval of our meeting minutes from June 9th, 2021. And I would accept a motion for approval.
So moved.
Eric, second. I'll second that. All in favor? Eric?
Yep, aye.
Carl? Let me see. Somebody else is trying to get it. We may have a hard time here until we can get Joe unfrozen.
Am I not back?
Now you're back. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Okay, you're back. No, not a problem. Okay. So I'm going to call the vote for the approval of the minutes of 6/9/21 that Eric moved and I seconded. Okay, Carl. Eric.
Aye.
Paul. Amy. Joe.
Aye.
And Elizabeth, aye. Okay. And then the next set of minutes was sent out late, but we've got them, which is May 12th, 2021. Did anybody get a chance to take a peek at those? I can give you a minute if you need a minute to look at them.
I reviewed them.
Okay. Can I have a motion to
Reviewed them.
approve?
Move to approve. So
Thanks,
moved.
Joe.
Second.
Second from Eric. All in favor? Carl. Eric.
Aye.
Paul. Amy. Joe.
Aye.
And Elizabeth says aye. Okay. And the last set of minutes is April 14th, 2021. Can I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Eric, second?
Second.
Joe? All right, all in favor? Carl? Eric?
Aye.
Paul? Amy? Joe?
Aye.
And Elizabeth says aye. Okay, that's great. So that is the minutes. The primary and really the most important, the primary agenda item today is to go through the Abrahams Group financial policies, which I think you all had received, and we got, I think you've gotten some comments back, Mark. So maybe we should just turn it over to you and let you walk us through, and we can talk comments. At the end of the policies, I think our hope is that we would really make a vote to endorse or not endorse, with recommendations, without recommendations, some guidance for the commissioner's review of the policies. And these will eventually have to go to the whole advisory board. So we'll have to make a recommendation to the advisory board, but I'm hoping we can do that. Okay, Mark, let's turn it over to you.
Thank you, Beth. So welcome, everyone. Pleasure to work with you today on the financial policies. This is version 17 of the financial policies. The initiative to do the financial policies came out of the management letter comments, one of the repeated comments that the county does not have formal financial policies. There are 11 sections to this policy document. Some of the language came from existing county documents. Most of the language, though, was really from a policy perspective that I wrote. What I'm hoping for is that the policies, A, satisfy the management letter comments and that comment goes away, but more importantly, that the policy sets up a framework by which these 11 subject areas can go forward with clarity between different stakeholders in the county. Once the policies are adopted, I would expect they'll be updated, hopefully on an annual basis. But more importantly, I think a set of procedures need to follow these policies in order for these policies to be implemented. And with that, perhaps some revised forms. And I'm also thinking that since a lot of effort has gone in to better utilize the infinite vision system, which is another management letter comment, that many of the procedures and related forms can be built around the updates to the infinite vision system. So with that, I've received some comments from Eric, and I can begin to address those comments. So Eric, thank you for sending me those comments, and please don't apologize that you got them to me today. I appreciate your effort on doing that. So Beth, would it be appropriate just to dive into Eric's comments and then entertain other comments that your committee may have?
Yes, that would be a great way to start.
All right, so his first comment is on page 11, that the first two lines on page 11 are inconsistent. So let me clarify. And am I screen sharing, or can you
Yes.
see?
If you can screen share, that's probably a really good idea so that
Yeah.
everybody can see what we're talking about.
That would make sense. All right, can you see?
Yep, that's clear.
So this is what Eric is talking about, I believe.
Yeah.
One of the sentences reads, departments may transfer monies within budgeted categories without the approval of the county commissioners or the advisory board. And the second sentence, departments may transfer monies between budgeted categories with the approval of the commissioners and the advisory board,
Oh.
blah, 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 blah.
I
So
missed
Eric,
that.
sorry?
I missed the difference in that line, within versus between. That's,
Okay.
that
Super.
clarifies that one for me.
Super. All right, the next, and the next issue deals with the reserve list. Comment is departments can choose to hold back prior year funds. Let me move this over. So my understanding is Joe and John at the end of the year would determine what goes into the reserve list. Basically, funds that were reserved in department expenditure budgets for those departments who wish to reserve prior year funds into the next year. This is similar to, and maybe is, an encumbrance.
That's what I was gonna ask. It sounds like an
Yeah.
encumbrance.
It is an encumbrance. There is a management letter finding that says encumbrances must have a order to support that encumbrance. And also there was a management letter comment that encumbrances in many times were never closed out. So in the financial policies, I believe under year-end processing, there is a termination date of July 31, that any encumbrance would be closed as of July 31 following the end of the fiscal year. That gives departments 31 days to clean up outstanding encumbrances. And by having that termination date, the management letter comment should go away. The only exception, I believe, is construction contracts, which should be looked at on an individual basis. So the answer, Eric, is yes. Departments can choose to hold back prior year funds, but really it's an encumbrance process.
So let me ask you this, if the department has sets up an encumbrance, let's say they have a bill, they're expecting a bill for $1,000. They hold back the $1,000 similar to an encumbrance. July 31st comes around, they still don't have the bill. That money then would go back as an unexpended balance and then would become similar to a municipal prior year bill that would require the advisory board to approve, correct?
An alternative would be, let's take your example, we've got $1,000 of a good that we ordered but have not received. That's the definition of an encumbrance.
Right.
So if it's received, then it gets paid. It becomes a payable, becomes an expense, and the encumbrance is liquidated. But now 31 days have passed and the bill has not arrived. Let's assume the good or service has been received. So it becomes a payable and then it gets paid when that invoice comes in. That could be another 30 days. The alternative would be to terminate the encumbrance and then add it to the next year's budget. What do you guys think about that?
Well, by that time, it's too late to actually add it to the budget because the budget would have already been approved. So I guess it would be, I guess my suggestion would be that after July 31st, if a invoice or other payable is received, then that amount would have to be paid out of unexpended balances once that's certified. Again, similar to the encumbrance versus free cash process
Yeah,
on the
so
municipal side.
let me make sure I understand what you're saying. 31 days pass, no bill. Purchase order is liquidated. The bill comes in over the next 30 days. That liquidation adds to the prior year unexpended general fund balance.
Correct.
It would go to the advisory board to be paid as a prior year bill.
Is that the process, and I'll throw this back to the rest of the committee, is that the process we follow now if there's a bill that comes in after fiscal year end? If so, I think it should follow the same process. Strictly my opinion.
What about other members of the committee? Do you have opinions about this? And I wonder if John or Bill want to speak to the process right now?
So I'll weigh in briefly. Good afternoon, everyone.
John.
It's a good question. Eric, like yourself, I have the understanding that any prior year deficiency that comes in after the accounts payable deadline is expired will be paid for with the current fiscal year resources. In my experience, those expenditures, no matter what kind of good or services the expenditure is coded as a prior year deficiency. So you can always look back to identify, is it legal bills? Is it, delivery of goods and services that we have a problem with? I have not heard from Nancy specifically about any such prior year deficiencies in my experience here yet, but I would assume, maybe I shouldn't, that our policy mimics that understanding that you and I both have, that we should have the resources in the process to move unexpected bills that come in after the accounts payable deadline ends, to make the payment, code it appropriately, and most importantly, get to the root cause of why it's happening.
Agreed.
Are there many of these?
No, I don't think so.
don't think so.
Again, I haven't experienced a full fiscal year cycle, but in my brief conversations with Nancy, I know Phil's on the line. I haven't heard of anything. Phil, have you heard anything like this in the past? I'm sure it happens from time to time, but not regularly.
Phil is on the line, I think. Phil?
Phil Iantosca.
Maybe he stepped away for a minute. Mark, is there does this come up in the Government Financiers Officers Association Distinguished Budgeting recommendations? Is anything like this discussed there? Because we do want to make sure we meet those standards if we can.
No, it wouldn't be in the budgeting
It
area.
wouldn't show up there.
It
Okay,
would be in the purchasing / accounts payable area.
okay. Great.
Understand my intent here. My intent is to get rid of the management letter comment.
Yep.
Dealing with encumbrances that don't close.
Yeah.
So we're closing encumbrances 31 days after the close of the fiscal year. Now we got a couple of outstanding bills that came in late after that 31 day period. So I have no problem as a policy to follow any prior year bill process. You guys are used to that, and this would add to it.
And that would be general accounting principle. General accounting principles anyway, because even though the county acts a little differently as far as free cash unexpended balances are concerned. The spirit of the rules are still pretty much the same.
So could we word this so that it would meet what Eric is suggesting and John?
Hold on, Beth, I got the printer printing here. I got a,
Okay,
Is it a dot matrix printer and really loud?
no, it's an office jet printer. Say that again, Beth.
I was just wondering, so can we make sure that our language here would meet what Eric was saying is his experience along with John, your experience? I mean.
So I have a brief update for you, Chairman Childs, if I may weigh in quickly.
Go for it.
Phil is working on taking the minutes of your meeting, and he doesn't have a microphone, so I just checked in with him around the corner.
Okay,
The county does in fact have a line item in the budget for unpaid prior bills. In FY21, it's budgeted at $2,500. No expenditures have been made. There were a couple of years, FY19, FY20, where some amount of money was paid. I think one year it was $917, and one year it was about $5,000. I'm not sure what those items were, but we do have a mechanism within our financial structure to account for these types of things. And so with Eric's permission and Mark's guidance, I would recommend breathing a little life into this language that directs the county to enumerate any such prior year deficiencies in its budget and make payment from unpaid bills line item, which currently exists in our budget.
And if that $2,500 is exhausted, to me, it's a wash, because you close an encumbrance, it adds to the prior year balance, then you process the unpaid bill from that balance, and it washes out, but it's a transparent, open process.
Correct.
So John, if I understand what you're saying right, then that would mean that, so we have a line item within the operating budget that's specifically for unpaid prior year bills. So we would be actually paying a prior year bill under the current budget. So if we got something on August 1st of 2021, we would actually be paying it out of the fiscal 22 budget,
Correct,
correct?
correct.
Okay, so we have a budget, that's something that's different than, I didn't realize we had a budgeted line item for prior year bills. So that's, okay, so I guess the
Yeah, it is,
clarification-
Eric's is a good catch there. It's a little bit of a nuance. I will tell you at the state level, there is no funding of prior year deficiencies.
Right,
You get such a bill, you have to transfer it from some other resource to cover the obligation.
yeah, like similar to the towns and cities, you'd have to do you'd
A
have to
reserve fund
a
transfer.
town meeting out
Right.
of free cash or something on that idea. Because DLS would never, the DLS would never allow paying a prior year bill out of the current budget.
But and Mark, I mean, feel free to weigh in here, but I like the idea that the county has a relatively small amount of money available to make payments on such goods and services that are small in nature, so the county can pay its bills. In the event we ran into something substantial, say we missed or something happened with a large scale project and the amount of money that the county had to pay out exceeded that $2,500, I like the idea that there's a check and balance where the advisory board and the finance committee has to then weigh in. We're gonna pause meeting our deadline of paying within a certain amount of time so that the finance committee can see why we have to pay out a large amount of money, say 10,000 or some amount of money, and what the justification is for it. But $2,500, I think that's low hanging fruit. I think it's a good business practice to have that kind of cash on hand just for that reason.
So we got two issues. We've got a prior year bill, fiscal 21, to be paid out of fiscal 22 operating budget under the line item called prior year bill, up to $2,500. That's been the county practice. Then we've got an excess greater than $2,500. That can be paid, I'm going to suggest, from an alternative or an available fund. And one of that could be the prior year surplus, because you're going to add to that prior year surplus any encumbrance that you close. So to me, that part is a wash. Does everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
All right, in the municipal world, the vote would be a 4/5 vote if it's a special town meeting
Right,
and a 3/4 vote if it's an annual town meeting. But this would require just the approval of the commissioners, and the advisory board would weigh in on any prior year surplus monies to fund the invoice.
yes.
Would
Okay.
this take care of our management letter issue, Mark? If we did to continue the practice the way we're talking about it now with the $2,500 as a line
So-
item?
So the management letter has never commented on the payment of a prior year bill out of current year resources through the use of the prior year line item. Maybe because it's $2,500 and it's immaterial. I'm not sure, but they never commented on that. What
Okay,
they have commented on was the purchase orders lingering and lingering and lingering,
Right,
i.e. to wait for the bill to come in, and come in and come in.
right.
So by getting rid of that issue, we get rid of the management letter comment. Now we've created an issue that I think we resolved procedurally.
yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mark. It turns out to be a wash. I mean, it's really not a financial impact, it's more of a procedural impact.
Right, but it's open and transparent.
Right.
And it gets rid of a management letter comment.
All
All right,
right,
but Eric, you mentioned, all right, so we're okay with that?
yep,
That sounds good. So we're just going to adjust this language a little bit to reflect that, right, Mark?
Right, all
Okay.
right. Before we go on to Eric's next issue, Eric did comment about the certified free cash in a municipality. In the policies, I've introduced the concept that the county will certify its prior year unappropriated general fund balance
Through what mechanism?
to a mechanism that really Joe and John will determine. But basically, after the close of the fiscal year, Joe D will go through a certification process.
Okay,
I think it is important that county management, treasury, finance committee, advisory board understand as early as possible how much that figure is. What is that figure? And any issues on that?
not for me.
Okay. Next item, financial reserves can be used as a revenue source for budget. And the answer is yes, it has been in the past. What we're trying to do is wean the county off of using prior year surpluses to fund current year operating budget items. Preferably to use prior year reserves to fund non-recurring items. And this is part of the, I think, the budget policies in section 2, and I hammered away on that. So Eric, the answer to your question is the county is currently, or I should say has used in the past, register excise deed surplus, prior year unexpended balance, and stabilization to draw on to help balance the budget.
But usually, if I'm not mistaken, if there is a need for, like, for example, stabilization money, it's usually done in a supplemental budget, not as part of the financial forecast. So I guess maybe I'm just trying to make sure that I understand that are we using projected financial reserves as part of our revenue estimate for the coming fiscal year?
Hopefully not.
Okay,
That's not the intent,
okay.
but fair to say it has been used in the past.
And is that it? I haven't seen the management letters, so I don't know what's in the management letters, but is that part of it as well? Was there any discussion on financial reserves?
No,
Okay,
no, silent on that.
okay,
The management letter deals more with accounting issues, not budgeting issues.
okay. All right, I'm good with that one then.
Okay. Page 14 and 15, unexpended balances equal to 10% of the operating. This should be the rule for stabilization, not unexpended balances. Let's see what page 14 and 15 look like.
Yeah, I mean, it just in my, like, we just went through a financial policies for our town. And part of that review was the stabilization rule, or not rule, but the guideline that your stabilization account should always be somewhere between 10 and 15% of your overall budget. So I just was curious that, I mean, are we talking about financial reserves as well as stabilization? Should both be in that 10 to 15% range?
So let's distinguish. GFOA is a generally accepted practice. Says your general fund balance should be 2 months worth of working capital.
Okay,
That's 16%. So most places round that to 15%. So when you look at your general fund unappropriated balance, and you look at your other sources of revenues that are sitting there as reserves, it's greater than 20% right now.
okay,
Then you've got stabilization. And in these policies, I've stated that stabilization should be no lower than 5%
right,
and no higher than 20%
Yep.
of your operating budget. And John and I have discussed that, and we feel that 20% is a good buffer. So think of it now, you've got 3.8 million in your stabilization fund. Your county budget is roughly $31 million. Do the math, and you can go up to $6-7 million in stabilization without it being considered robust.
Okay.
All right,
Can I
does that-
talk about that real quick, Mark? Because
Yeah.
this
Thanks,
is an
John, I was just gonna ask you to comment on this a little bit and explain what,
right.
explain this.
So again, I fully respect the guidelines that were in the original procedure that capped it at 10%. That's a sensible number that I see in municipal budgets. It's a typical guideline for stabilization. And it's a healthy guideline that bond rating agencies look at as fiscal stability. But in the conversations with Mark, one of the observations that I have, and you folks have a lot more experience than I do, the major funding sources for the county government are built upon what I call volatile revenue resources. They're driven by assessments as well as registry of deeds and other revenue sources that have a certain unpredictability to them. And in that way, county government's resources are different than a municipal or a town funding blend. And so when I look at, a downturn in financing for our government in any given year, if we were to sustain a 5 to 10% hit like that which have occurred in 2008, it would eliminate in one fell swoop virtually all of the stabilization fund to maintain services. And that doesn't speak to year 2 or year 3. So if you're thinking of a multi-year financial downturn, a recession, if you will, you want to have stabilization that can bridge those years until you can recover. And in discussions with Mark, I thought the 20% was better. We have the resources this year. We'll be talking about that in the next month or so about what to do with this year's surplus. I intend to really fortify stabilization so that not if, but when the tough times come, we can weather it more in a balanced and thoughtful process than just whole-scale cutting of services and jobs. Having that kind of flexibility in an organization like ours not only gives us that stabilization, pun intended, but I think will also be attractive to the bond rating companies. Norfolk County's bond rating is not that great. It's relatively low, but if we start showing a commitment to these stabilization and capital funds, we're on the path to better bond rating. So that was the justification for it. I know it's a little unconventional in terms of its size, but I feel pretty confident and pretty committed to the idea that stabilization and a strong stabilization is not only good for the county, but good for our business. Thanks.
So the policy says no greater than 20%. It's highlighted here.
Okay.
So that should give you plenty of wiggle room there. Okay, capital
You
items. of
satisfied
less-
with that, Eric?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
All right, page 19, capital items of less than 5,000 shall be part of the operating budget. Opinion, capital items should not be in the operating budget. So I've gone back
This
and
is a
forth.
pet peeve of mine, Mark, so I'm sorry, but.
No, this is
It's good.
good, and I've gone back and forth on this. The original purchasing policy document has a cutoff at $500. That has not been changed. Nancy, Joe, and I have talked about this, and we felt it should be higher than 500. What is it, 1,000, 2,000? You look at GAAP, you look at the audited statements, you look at the policy over in Treasury, and for GAAP, for the financial statements, it's $15,000. Any capital item greater than 15,000 will be depreciated. Anything less than 15,000 will be expensed. But that's not budget, and budget shouldn't tie into GAAP in this question. So the real question is, should there be a dollar threshold? And I chose 5,000. And that was arbitrary. Should there be a dollar threshold, or as Eric is suggesting, I think in your email, transferring out capital items out of the operating budget into the capital budget last month, suggested any item that had a useful life greater than a year and was a one-time expense would be your definition of capital, if I remember your words correctly.
Yeah, in a general sense, absolutely.
So I'm not so much concerned about a dollar value. I'm concerned that there needs to be a clear-cut item that says, all right, this is a capital item and goes into the capital budget. And this is an operating item and goes into the operating budget. And we're talking items of $500 to maybe $20,000. So what should the language be? And you guys have had more experience with Norfolk County than I have. That's the issue. And how do we clarify it?
Well, I mean, overall, what my suggestion really is maybe a clarification generally of what exactly is a capital item, first of all. Because, again, and in my interpretation, any durable good that's being purchased by a department that's over that, I won't even say it's over a certain amount of money. I mean, if it's not a reoccurring operational based expense, then I believe it should be a capital item versus a operating expense item. So as an example, if Department X wants to purchase a computer and the computer is only $500, a computer is not really an operating expense. It's a one-time purchase at a very small amount, but it's a one-time purchase that's actually a capital item because it has a durable life. So how do we just, I'm just looking at the fact of, if I'm a department and I say, okay, next year I feel like I'm going to have to replace 3 of my computers. So I'm going to put $15,000 into my operating budget, 5,000 per. That's really capital items. It's not really an operating expense. The software to run it and licensing would be an operating expense in my interpretation.
Right, so why should a department, I'm playing devil's advocate, Eric, why should a department have to wait until the capital budget is developed and approved later in the year, as opposed to having it in the operating budget so he or she could get that right up front?
Well, what I would suggest is, and we did this in our town, and it's worked out pretty well, is we created an operating budget line for capital expenses, a single account, so to speak, that doesn't fall under any one department and falls under, in this case, would fall under the director's direction, no pun intended. So there'd be a pool of monies. Let's say we allocate $25,000 and we put it into a line item within the budget that is at the control of the commissioners and the county director for capital items that are under a procurement threshold. So this way they wouldn't have to wait, but there is an approval process of purchasing that. So that item doesn't become a reoccurring drag on the revenue, because if we're going to fund capital, any kind of capital item into the operating budget, there has to be an offsetting revenue to keep the balance, the budget in balance. Taking that out and putting it into a single line that would allow a little bit more direction and a little bit more control on the overall picture. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make.
So you're saying something similar to an operating?
Yes and no. It would still be an operating budget line item. It just would fall under the director's office or under the commissioners, rather than having each department have their own individual an interpretation of what they feel they're going to need as capital needs.
Okay, so if Wollaston wanted a computer and maintenance wanted a computer, and each cost $1,500, they would submit that under the capital budget within the operating budget to the director, and there'd be 2 line items, one each for computers of $1,500.
Exactly,
And then the department doesn't have to wait till the end of the year.
right. So with the approval of the commissioners, the purchase can be made. And this way, there's also that extra control line where individual departments aren't going off purchasing equipment that the county leadership doesn't know about.
So you mentioned a threshold, a capital dollar threshold. So we're back to that 5,000 or whatever dollar threshold ought to be.
Well, under this, if I'm reading this right, we're saying the $5,000 amount. Is the intention here that any single department could budget for up to $5,000? Is that, like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, for
Yeah.
example, in our town, we set up an account with $50,000 and we put it into an operating expense under capital planning. So we have a capital stabilization fund, but we also have a capital account for smaller, quicker items that can be done fast if needed. So we have some liquidity for capital as opposed to the capital item being a massive, to have 20 people meet to purchase, a $500 computer.
Right. So let's get a common definition. A capital item is a one-time expense with a useful life greater than a year.
I would agree to that. I'll throw that out to the rest of the committee because I'm not the be all and end all here. But, that sounds reasonable to me.
So I got a stapler that's lasted me 5 years so far.
It's a nice stapler.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm not being coy here, but
No, I know.
how do we distinguish a stapler from a computer with that definition?
Well, a stapler is an office expense, not a capital item. So yes, does it have a durable life over a year? Yeah, but it's also a $4 item.
Yeah,
So maybe we say anything. I mean, maybe we come up with a range of what, this is why I was saying we have to kind of define what exactly is a capital item.
right. So
Outside of what
would 1,000 make sense?
I'm sorry?
Would 1,000 make sense, or going back to the original purchasing amount of $500?
Well, I don't know how to, maybe I'm not really being as clear as I would like to be. I'm not sure exactly. I guess my purpose here is, I don't think any capital item should be in a department budget, operating budget. So, what we call a capital item, maybe that's the clarification that needs to happen. But I'm trying to avoid having a single department
Defining itself what a capital.
Exactly. I mean, like in your example of the stapler, which is a good example, by the way, yes, that has a life of 15 years, but is that a capital purchase? No, I think we're all reasonable on that.
Right.
But again, we had a similar situation in our town where one of our committees wanted to purchase some specialized computer equipment, like for projectors and things like that. I think it was our planning board. And they put it into their operating budget. And on the finance committee, we stopped them and said, no, this is not an operating budget. Operating budget is a reoccurring expense to the department and to the county, not a one-time purchase that, because once you put it into an operating budget, it becomes an operating budget item. I guess that's my point. My point is that if somebody comes and says, I want $5,000 in my operating budget because I'm going to buy a computer next year, that $5,000 becomes a reoccurring operating expense for that department year over year. So now we've segregated aside X amount of dollars in total across all these departments for items that are really just one-time costs, and then they shouldn't be in the operating budget unless there's an ongoing cost. Now, to your example on the stapler has 10 years, is a 10-year item. And is there a reoccurring cost? Yeah, because staples cost money. So In that case, that makes it an operating budget item because it's a office supply. You are
Mhm.
actually buying something to keep it going, similar to buying software on a computer to keep it going.
Okay, so pulling this into the director's budget as capital within the operating budget allows for greater scrutiny as to what is a capital item.
Yes, and also creates some oversight.
Right.
The other thing it does is it protects from the getting built into the operating budget on an ongoing basis with an escalating cost. So
Right.
it's fiscally really smart, actually.
All right, so I'm going to change this second sentence that's highlighted. For budgeting purposes, capital items are a one-time non-recurring expense with a useful life greater than a year. All capital items falling under this definition will be compiled in the county director's budget as a capital item within the operating budget.
If I could weigh in briefly on one item, I agree with 99% of what's being said. But I'm falling back on my experience where if you have an operating budget, you use it for operating purposes. If you have one-time needs in an organization for miscellaneous equipment replacement or office furniture or things that just come up in the course of a year, I would recommend consideration of a separate account. I think this is where Eric was going.
Yep.
That allows the director to hold a sum of money for those annual purchases that, you know, should not really fit within a capital budget. They are miscellaneous in nature. A great example is we're redoing the county commissioner's office here. It hasn't been touched in a long time. The furniture looks like it was taken off of a yard sale. We're getting used furniture from the schools. It's less than an ideal environment. If you want to buy a chair, you got to buy a $200 chair from WB Mason that doesn't fit right. It's just, if you really want this to be a shoestring budget, we can get there. I'd prefer not to. I'd prefer to have, and I'll borrow Eric's word, the liquidity or the available funds in an operating budget to afford those one-time events every year that just come up. File cabinets come to mind, tack boards, chairs, even computers. An organization this large, when I was at the crime laboratory, it was a $50,000 a year budget. Sometimes I spent it. Most of the times I didn't, depending upon what broke and what needed to be fixed. But what that does is it gives the advisory board, the finance committee, a clear idea of what kind of things may be looming if you have a computer replacement program, or if you have major hires or changes in personnel and events that might dictate the need to spend that money in a certain direction. So I would appreciate the flexibility to use a flat amount of money for this type of purpose, not a lot, each year to keep the buses running. But other than that, I think everything Eric said, I agree with.
John, do you think that putting it into the county director's budget basically as something that you approve makes sense?
Makes
And then
perfect.
It would be a pooled line
Yep.
item for all departments across the county.
Yeah, I think any such event like that should receive the director and the commissioner's approval. Absolutely. Yep.
And as far as the amount to fund that item, I know, like, again, in little old Avon, we have a capital line that's $50,000.
Yeah.
Now, we very rarely use it, and of course, whatever doesn't get used rolls over to unexpended balances anyway. But as everybody knows, when we had that first discussion about, when I first brought up capital items in the budget, I was able to pull out almost $60,000 that I was able to see just sitting in the budgets without actually going through tooth and nail. So, you know, I think maybe at a later date, we come up with a number that amount should be. 50,000 may be good. I mean, I would defer to John on what he thinks in his experience. You know, do you think that a number of 50,000 would be sufficient to cover year over year? Or do you think it should be larger? Should it be smaller? You know, I guess your opinion on that. I think we have the capacity in the budget to not affect the expenses of each department. It won't negatively affect any single department. It's just a reallocation to a different way of doing it.
So I think 50 is a good scalable number, Eric, based on our budget size. And I will tell you, my tendency in my career has been to try to keep that expense from happening as late in the fiscal year as I can.
Right.
It's another buffer to any kind of a financial problem that you may encounter. I understand if we run into problems here, we go to the advisory board, we ask for a transfer, and you folks tap into reserves. Well, if it's April and I've spent $1,000 out of that account and I've got a deficiency somewhere else, take it, transfer it. Don't wait for it to revert. It's another way of just having some flexibility to solve problems. So I think 50 is a good number.
Do we need to put in a number?
Maybe we could leave, I mean, what I would suggest is maybe have it in the policy that the number would be determined as part of the budgetary process year over year. And maybe, we go to each of the departments in October and November and say, what do you think your capital needs for next year are going to be? Or what do you think the smaller capital needs are going to be? And then we can recommend at that point. But I would agree that, 50,000, I think, is a good starting number.
But it doesn't have to be in this document. It could just be as we develop the budget and we know that we're going to approve some number for that line item.
Right, it's just a matter of having them create that line.
That's it, we'll go into the budget memo.
Yes, that would be great.
Right.
So in this capital asset definition, Mark and Eric and John, are we talking about, we're talking about useful life of more than 1 year, but are we really sticking with the $5,000? Or are we actually thinking more like 500?
No, we're not. For budgeting purposes, capital items shall be a one-time, non-recurring item.
Right.
Period.
Yeah,
Right.
so we're
No
gonna
actual value.
Right.
change that definition. That's one of our recommendations, is to change that definition.
Yeah, well, it's in red. I'm gonna write it up after this.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Any other members of the FinCom want to weigh in on that? Agree, disagree? Think we should do it any differently? Joe?
No, I think that will work.
Okay, all right.
Wow.
Change, okay.
Eric, you had one more comment, but that refers back to this comment.
Yes,
So I think that's resolved as well.
yes, it is.
And that completes your comments.
And Mark, I appreciate you getting, like I said, I'm sorry I sent everything so late. I appreciate all the answers.
You're welcome. Well, I want to get this right, and I want to give you the flexibility so that the county can be managed properly going forward. Anybody else?
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else have comments that we should address in these policies? Joe, Amy?
No,
You feel pretty good about where we are with these?
yes,
Yes, yeah.
big
Okay.
difference.
Great.
It'll hold people accountable.
Yeah, I really want to, Mark, I really want to thank you guys for doing such a great job and for all the input of everybody into this. So I'm wondering if what we should do here is take I would certainly entertain a motion from the Finance Committee to endorse these policies, to recommend these policies to the Norfolk County Advisory Board and the commissioners with the recommended changes on page 12, which is the language clarification around the reserve list, and with a language changes for the capital asset definition on page 18.
19.
And that if we make those those are our two substantive changes, I think, recommended. And then to support the, I guess we don't need any language change around the stabilization percentages and the
No.
unexpected, those are fine with, okay, all right. So I sort of get a motion to, should it be recommend or endorse? Some of you guys who are better on this wordsmithing stuff, is it?
Madam Chair, may I ask a question, please?
Please, Joe.
Is this how we will be approving the report in pieces? Or will we do it all at once? Or what's the, and Mark, maybe to you, from your experience, what is the best way to approach this?
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
So-
That's a good question.
So we got pieces. We got the financial policies. It's a document, you've seen it, it's 37 pages long. And it's self-contained. We have the capital program and capital budget. You've seen the results of that, but you haven't really seen the tool, mechanism by which the data is compiled. You can print out any year or years you want for capital budgeting. That is a self-contained deliverable. We'll probably have a cover letter with instructions on how to use it. The third is a financial forecast, similar to the capital planning and budgeting. It's a tool. It's going to have a set of instructions and a cover letter. So that's a third deliverable. The fourth is the regional services. I'm getting some feedback here.
Somebody is not muted. Can I just ask if they were speaking to mute themselves? Let's see, where is that coming from? I don't know where that's coming from. I can't see very well. Mark, do we need a screen share anymore, or can we get out of that for a minute?
You can get out of there. Let me just finish my thoughts here.
All right,
So the fourth is the regional services. Phase 1 report has been submitted to the commissioners. The phase 2 report will come after the community forum. That will be a self-contained document. And then the fifth is the operational review, which is going to be the larger document. It's a review of all county departments with findings and recommendations. Some of the recommendations cross over to the capital plan, some cross over to the financial forecast, some cross over to the policies, et cetera. So that's going to be another document. So you've got, I don't see where you can pull all of them together into one big document.
No.
The two tools just don't fit in.
Okay,
Does that
No.
help?
yes.
Joe, do you want us to approve this to go to the whole advisory board and then do are you thinking we're gonna approve each of the pieces at the advisory board level? Is that what you're thinking?
Obviously, there's a ton of information here, and I want to make sure that the advisory board gets it in a manner in which they can tackle it without being overwhelmed.
Yeah,
So, but at the same time, I wanted to defer to Mark on the typical practices with regard to the report, but taking them individually, I think would be helpful to the larger group so that they can get the information. We can send it to them for their review and then bring it up at the meeting in September
okay,
individually.
okay. All right, so then this should be a recommendation from the finance committee to the advisory board, correct? Am I right about that, Joe?
Yes,
And so the vote should be to do that with these changes, recommending these changes, and then moving forward with the policies to the advisory board.
Are you saying recommending the adoption of these financial policies with recommended changes?
Welcome to the conferencing center.
Yes.
Somebody
Anytime
is
during
not
this
muted.
message, please enter your passcode followed by
Somebody's
the pound
not
sign.
muted.
3,300.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So, yes, that's what I was thinking. Joe and,
Your
that
passcode
seem right? To you, that seems right to you?
I'm sorry,
That's right,
The-
recommending approval of the
person.
Norfolk County policies with these recommendations.
yes,
Okay, all right, okay.
Yep.
Mark, okay with that? John Cronin, is that all right?
Good.
Okay,
Okay, so I'll make the motion to recommend moving the financial policies to the Norfolk County Advisory Board with the agreed upon changes.
great, thanks. Do I have a second?
Second,
Thanks, Amy. Okay, all in favor? Carl, you're not on the call. Eric,
Yep,
Paul, Amy,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Okay, wonderful. Mark, thank you very much for doing this for all of us.
You're welcome.
All
Yes,
right.
thanks, Mark.
Thank
I-
you, Mark.
I just want to remind people that before we close, we're going to adjourn in 1 minute here. I just want to remind people we have a meeting, a brief meeting tomorrow, a joint meeting with the commissioners. And we will take up the agenda tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I am anticipating that the meeting, this meeting for us shouldn't be more than 30 minutes at the most. I think it's gonna be a very brief meeting. But, and Joe Shea is gonna chair that meeting. But we'll do our roll call as we join into the commissioners meeting. Any other announcements, any other business that we need to bring up that we didn't think about ahead of time? Okay,
Me.
No, with appreciation to Mark, I move to adjourn.
thank you, Joe. Second. Second, Eric, was that you?
It's like it, yep.
Okay, and we have to vote it. I'm sorry, guys. Eric,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
Joe. Aye. Is that Joe? Are you an aye? And I'm
I'm
an
an
aye.
aye.
There we go. We're all adjourned. Thank you very
All right.
much, everybody. See
Thanks,
you
Beth.
tomorrow.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye,
everyone.
guys.